I'm Helena Cross, 32, and for 7 years I built the client relationships that kept Hartwell Associates afloat. Last Tuesday, they laughed as security escorted me out, calling me replaceable in front of the entire office. But as I reached the lobby doors, something happened that wiped every smirk off their faces. 15 of our top clients, worth over $3 million in annual revenue, stood up from their chairs and walked out with me. What they didn't know was that I had spent months quietly documenting every broken promise, every cut corner, every lie they told these clients. The betrayal that destroyed my career was about to destroy theirs. If you've ever been underestimated or cast aside by people who should have valued you, like and subscribe for stories of quiet strength and unexpected justice. 7 years ago, I walked into Hartwell Associates with a framed photo of my college graduation, my parents beaming beside me, their faces full of pride. That photo sat on my desk every day since, a reminder of how far I'd come from a small town where nobody expected much from the quiet girl who preferred books to parties. I was 25 then, fresh out of graduate school with a master's in business communications and stars in my eyes. Hartwell Associates promised mentorship, growth, and a partnership track for exceptional performers. The senior partner, Richard Hartwell himself, shook my hand during the interview and said I had exactly the kind of integrity and dedication they were looking for. Those words felt like a blessing. I'd grown up watching my father work 2 jobs to keep our family stable, never complaining, always reliable. That work ethic was in my bones. At Hartwell Associates, I threw myself into every task with the same quiet determination that had carried me through scholarship applications and late-night study sessions. My role as client relations specialist seemed perfect. I had a natural ability to listen, really listen, to what people needed. While other employees rushed through calls or delegated follow-ups to assistants, I took detailed notes, remembered birthdays and anniversaries, and followed up personally on every concern. Clients began asking for me specifically. Within 6 months, I was promoted to Senior Client Relations Manager. The partners praised my exceptional rapport with their most demanding accounts. I felt valued, appreciated, essential, but even in those early months, I noticed things. How the partners' sons and nephews seemed to glide into senior positions without the grinding years of proof everyone else endured. How credit for my successful client retention somehow appeared in other people's performance reviews. How my suggestions in meetings were ignored until a male colleague repeated them verbatim and received applause. I told myself it was normal workplace politics. Every company had favorites. I just needed to work harder, be more indispensable. The photo on my desk reminded me daily that success required persistence, not complaints. Looking back, I realize I was already being groomed for exactly what happened last Tuesday. They needed someone competent enough to keep their clients happy, loyal enough never to question the system, and naive enough to believe that hard work would eventually be rewarded. I was the perfect employee, until I became the perfect scapegoat. By my 3rd year at Hartwell Associates, I had developed what I privately called my client Bible, a detailed spreadsheet that tracked every interaction, preference, concern, and success with each account. This wasn't required by the firm. It was my own system for ensuring no detail fell through the cracks. The spreadsheet told a story that would have impressed anyone who bothered to look. In 36 months, I had personally secured 14 major new accounts, worth a combined $2.8 million in annual revenue. More importantly, I had maintained a 98% client retention rate in an industry where 70% was considered excellent. Each entry represented hours of careful relationship building. Take the Morrison Manufacturing account, a $400,000 annual contract. That came to us because I spent 3 months understanding their unique supply chain challenges. While competitors pitched generic solutions, I had studied their quarterly reports, attended industry conferences, and developed customized strategies that addressed their specific pain points. Or the Riverside healthcare system, worth $600,000 annually. Their CEO, Dr. Patricia Lewiston, had been burned by 3 consulting firms who overpromised and underdelivered. Our first meeting lasted 4 hours, not because I was selling, but because I was listening. I asked about her vision for patient care, her staffing challenges, her budget constraints. By the end, she said she felt heard for the first time in years. These weren't lucky breaks or inherited relationships. I researched each prospect thoroughly, crafted personalized approaches, and followed up religiously. My success rate was 60% higher than the firm average, but the partners never asked how I did it. They simply expected the results to continue. What hurt most was watching colleagues receive credit for my work. Junior associates would be assigned to assist with my accounts, then somehow become the primary contact in official documentation. Partners would reference team efforts that were entirely my solo achievements. During the annual review cycle, I watched as my client acquisition numbers appeared in other people's performance summaries. I started keeping more detailed records, not just for clients, but for my own contributions. Email timestamps, meeting notes, contract negotiations I had personally managed. I told myself it was professional development, building a portfolio for eventual partnership consideration. The truth was simpler and more painful. I was already sensing that my efforts were being systematically diminished. Some part of me knew I would need proof of my value someday. I just never imagined that day would come in the form of a security escort and a room full of laughing colleagues. Those relationships I had built so carefully, with Morrison Manufacturing, Riverside Healthcare, and 13 other major accounts, represented more than revenue streams. They represented trust. Trust that I had earned through honesty, competence, and genuine care for their success. Trust that the partners at Hartwell and Associates would soon discover they couldn't transfer or replace. The partnership agreement draft arrived in my email on a rainy Thursday morning in March, exactly 4 years into my tenure at Hartwell and Associates. The subject line read, Partnership Track Discussion, Confidential, and for exactly 37 minutes, I believed my hard work was finally being recognized. The document outlined a pathway to junior partnership within 18 months, contingent on maintaining current performance levels and demonstrating exceptional leadership capabilities. I printed it immediately, hands trembling slightly as I read through the compensation structure, equity percentages, and timeline. Everything I had worked toward seemed within reach. Then I attended the quarterly partners meeting the following Monday. We're pleased to announce 2 new additions to our partnership track, Richard Hartwell announced, his voice carrying that particular tone reserved for important pronouncements. Kevin Dalton and Marcus Brennan have demonstrated the kind of strategic thinking and client management excellence that represents our firm's future. Kevin Dalton, 28 years old, Harvard MBA, nephew of the firm's founding partner. 3 years of experience, during which he had somehow been credited with securing 2 major accounts that I had personally developed from initial contact through signed contracts. His strategic thinking consisted mainly of nodding along with my proposals and presenting them to clients as his own innovations. Marcus Brennan, 31, another Ivy League graduate whose father played golf with Richard Hartwell every Saturday. Marcus had spent the previous year managing the firm's special projects, a nebulous role that seemed to involve lengthy lunches with potential investors and organizing client entertainment events. His client management experience was limited to hosting networking receptions and remembering which clients preferred whiskey over wine. I sat in the back of the conference room, the partnership draft still folded in my jacket pocket, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. Not anger, not yet. Something closer to recognition. The realization that I had been operating under a completely false set of assumptions about how success was measured at this firm. After the meeting, I approached Richard Hartwell directly. I received the partnership discussion document last week, I said, keeping my voice professional and steady. I wanted to understand the timeline and next steps. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a micro-expression I had learned to read during years of client negotiations. Surprise, followed quickly by something that looked like irritation. Ah, yes, he said, glancing around the emptying conference room. Helena, you're certainly a valuable team member. That document was more of a general template, you understand. Partnership decisions involve many factors beyond client relations. Strategic vision, business development, leadership presence. The phrase hung in the air between us like an accusation. I thought of the countless client crises I had resolved, the accounts I had saved through careful negotiation, the junior associates I had trained and mentored. Apparently, none of that constituted leadership in their eyes. I understand, I said, because it was true. I finally did understand. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table and created a new spreadsheet. This one tracked something different, every instance of credit taken for my work, every meeting I was excluded from despite being the primary client contact, every time my ideas were dismissed only to be praised when presented by someone else. The pattern was unmistakable. I wasn't being prepared for partnership. I was being systematically positioned as the competent worker bee who made everyone else look good. The Golden Boys would advance on the foundation of my relationships and results, while I remained perpetually not quite ready for leadership roles. But here's what the Golden Boys didn't understand about the relationships I had built: they were based on trust, competence, and genuine care for client success. You can't transfer that with a memo or reassign it in an organizational chart. You earn it through years of consistent action and authentic connection. They were about to learn that lesson the hard way. The first crack appeared in my inbox on a Wednesday morning, disguised as routine client correspondence. Janet Morrison from Morrison Manufacturing had sent what looked like a standard quarterly check-in email, but buried in the third paragraph was a sentence that made my stomach drop. We're concerned about the discrepancies between the service levels outlined in our contract and what we're actually receiving. I read it 3 times before the implications fully hit me. Morrison Manufacturing was one of our most stable accounts, $400,000 annually for strategic planning and implementation support. I had personally negotiated every detail of their service agreement. There shouldn't have been any discrepancies. I called Janet immediately. Her voice carried a tension I hadn't heard before. Helena, I know you're not directly involved in service delivery anymore, she said carefully, but we're seeing some issues. The monthly strategy reports we were promised are coming in 6 weeks late. The dedicated account manager we were assigned hasn't returned our calls in 3 weeks. And the analysis quality, she paused. It's not what we've come to expect. From Hartwell Associates. My mouth went dry. I had been transitioned away from day-to-day Morrison account management 6 months earlier, told that my skills were needed for higher-level strategic initiatives. Kevin Dalton had taken over primary contact responsibilities, though I still maintained the relationship and handled escalations. I wasn't aware of these issues, I said honestly. Let me look into this immediately and get back to you. I'd appreciate that. We've been loyal clients for 4 years, but we need to see improvement quickly. We have options. After we hung up, I spent the next 2 hours digging through internal systems, trying to understand what had happened to Morrison's service delivery. What I found was worse than I had imagined. The monthly strategy reports hadn't just been delayed, they had been outsourced to a cut-rate consulting firm in another state. The dedicated account manager was actually a rotating cast of junior associates who were juggling 8 other accounts simultaneously. The analysis that Morrison was paying premium rates for was being generated by automated software templates with minimal customization, but Morrison Manufacturing wasn't the only account showing cracks. Over the following weeks, I started paying closer attention to casual comments from other long-term clients. Riverside Healthcare mentioned communication challenges with their new point of contact. The Brennan Logistics account expressed frustration with cookie-cutter solutions that didn't address their specific needs. A pattern was emerging that turned my stomach. The firm was systematically reducing service quality while maintaining premium pricing. They were counting on client inertia and long-standing relationships to prevent defections while they maximized profit margins through cost-cutting. I found myself in an impossible position. These clients trusted me. Many of them had specifically requested that I remain involved in their accounts, even in a reduced capacity. They confided their concerns because they believed I cared about their success, which I did, but I also depended on Hartwell and Associates for my livelihood. Speaking up about service quality issues could be seen as insubordination or disloyalty. Staying silent felt like betraying the clients who had supported my career development and trusted me with their business challenges. The breaking point came during a partners' meeting in late September. Richard Hartwell announced a new efficiency initiative designed to streamline service delivery and improve profitability. The details made my heart race with anxiety. Standard service packages would be reduced by 30%. Dedicated account managers would be eliminated in favor of team-based support. Client communications would be standardized and automated wherever possible. Premium pricing would remain unchanged. Some clients may initially resist these changes, Hartwell acknowledged, but market research shows that switching costs typically outweigh service concerns. Our existing relationships provide substantial protection against client defection. I thought about Janet Morrison's voice, the carefully controlled frustration of a loyal client feeling taken for granted. I thought about Dr. Lewiston at Riverside Healthcare, who had chosen us specifically because she felt heard and valued. They weren't abstract market research data points, they were real people whose businesses depended on the services we had promised to provide. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. If the firm was going to systematically compromise service quality while hiding behind relationships I had built, those clients deserved to know the truth. Not in a dramatic whistleblowing revelation, but through honest conversations about what they could realistically expect going forward. I just didn't realize yet how carefully I would need to document every one of those conversations. The voice recording was an accident, at least, that's what I told myself when it happened. I was sitting in the small conference room adjacent to the partner's office, preparing for a client call, when their weekly strategy meeting began next door. The walls in our historic downtown building were thinner than they appeared. Richard Hartwell's voice carried clearly through the shared wall. The Morrison account is pushing back on service reductions. They're threatening to review other options. Helena's been managing that relationship for years, came Marcus Brennan's voice. They trust her completely. Can't we just have her smooth things over? That's exactly the problem, said Kevin Dalton. These clients are too attached to individual relationships. It makes it harder to implement necessary changes. We need to wean them off personal dependencies. My finger hit the voice memo app on my phone without conscious thought. Something in their tone, the casual dismissal of client concerns, the strategic discussion of manipulation, triggered an instinct I hadn't known I possessed. The key is managing the narrative, Richard continued. We tell them it's about efficiency and better service delivery. Most clients won't push back if we frame it correctly. And if they do complain, we can always blame implementation challenges or transitional growing pains. What about the Riverside Healthcare contract? Marcus asked. They're already asking questions about the cost increases versus service reductions. Same approach. Helena has credibility with Lewiston. We have her deliver the message about enhanced team-based support, then gradually reduce her involvement. By the time they realize what's happening, switching costs will keep them locked in. I sat frozen, phone recording, as they discussed my clients like chess pieces in a game I hadn't known we were playing. These were relationships I had built through years of honest service and genuine care. They were talking about exploiting that trust to implement changes that directly contradicted our contractual commitments. The recording was 17 minutes long. 17 minutes of casual discussion about deceiving clients, manipulating relationships, and using my credibility as a shield for practices that bordered on fraud. That evening, I created a new folder on my personal laptop, Professional Documentation. The voice recording was the first file, but I knew it wouldn't be the last. If they were going to use my relationships to deceive my clients, I needed evidence of what was really happening. Over the following weeks, I developed a system. I started arriving early and staying late, using the quiet office hours to access internal documents that revealed the true scope of the service reductions. I printed copies of original client contracts and compared them to current service delivery reports. The discrepancies were staggering. Morrison Manufacturing was paying for 20 hours of senior consultant time monthly. They were receiving 6 hours from junior associates. Riverside Healthcare's contract specified dedicated project management support. They were getting shared resources across multiple accounts. Every major client was experiencing significant service degradation while paying premium rates. I began requesting copies of all my email communications for professional development purposes. I documented meetings with detailed follow-up memos. I created backup copies of client files that showed the evolution from promised services to delivered realities. The most damaging evidence came from internal billing records. The firm was charging clients for services that were never provided, billing senior consultant time for work done by interns, and adding administrative fees that weren't disclosed in original contracts. It wasn't just poor service, it was systematic fraud. Living this double life was exhausting. During the day, I maintained my professional facade, attending meetings and responding to client requests with the same competence I had always demonstrated. But every conversation felt layered with hidden knowledge, every client interaction weighted with the awareness of how they were being deceived. The stress was physical. I started waking up at 3 a.m., mind racing through the implications of what I was discovering. My appetite disappeared. I found myself checking and rechecking my documentation, terrified of being caught but unable to stop collecting evidence. The breaking point came when Kevin Dalton asked me to schedule a meeting with Janet Morrison to discuss service enhancements. I knew what he meant: deliver the scripted explanation for reduced service while making it sound like an improvement. What specific enhancements are we implementing? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Team-based efficiency improvements, he said, using the exact phrase from the partners' strategy discussion. You know how to position these things, Helena. Morrison trusts you completely. That night, I called Janet Morrison from my personal phone. Not to deliver Kevin's message, but to have an honest conversation about what she was actually experiencing with her account. Helena, I'm so glad you called, she said immediately. Things have been concerning lately, and I wasn't sure who to talk to. I took a deep breath and made a choice that would define everything that followed. Janet, I think we need to have a very honest conversation about your service experience and what you can realistically expect going forward. It was the first truly honest client conversation I had in months. It would not be the last. The handwritten thank you note arrived 3 days after my honest conversation with Janet Morrison. It was written on her personal stationery, cream-colored paper with her initials embossed in navy blue, and the message was brief but powerful. Thank you for finally telling me the truth. Your integrity means more than you know. Jim. I kept that note in my desk drawer, a tangible reminder that honesty still mattered in a world that seemed increasingly built on careful deceptions and strategic omissions. Janet's response had been immediate and decisive. After our conversation about the reality of her service delivery versus contractual promises, she had demanded a meeting with the partners to address what she diplomatically called alignment issues. She didn't mention our private discussion, but her specific questions and detailed knowledge of service discrepancies made it clear that someone had prepared her well. Word of Morrison Manufacturing's complaints reached me through Kevin Dalton, who was visibly stressed after his meeting with Janet. She knows things, he said, pacing in front of my desk. Specific details about billing processes and service delivery that clients shouldn't have access to. Someone's been talking to her. I maintained careful neutrality. Janet's been with us for 4 years. She's always been detail-oriented about her contracts. This is different. She's asking about service hour allocations, consultant qualifications, billing methodologies, technical stuff that's normally invisible to clients. What Kevin didn't understand was that Janet Morrison was just the beginning. Over the following months, I had similar conversations with 7 other long-term clients. Not all at once, that would have been too obvious, but gradually, strategically, whenever they expressed concerns or frustrations about their service experience. Dr. Patricia Lewiston from Riverside Healthcare was the most direct. During what was supposed to be a routine quarterly review, she closed her office door and spoke in the frank tone that had made her a successful hospital administrator. Helena, I need you to be completely honest with me. Is your firm cutting corners on our account? The question hung in the air between us. I could have deflected, given corporate talking points about efficiency improvements and team-based service delivery. Instead, I told her the truth. Your contract specifies dedicated project management and senior consultant involvement. What you're actually receiving is shared resources and junior-level analysis. The quality gap is significant and likely to widen. Her expression didn't change, but I saw her make a note in the margin of our service agreement. What would you recommend? Honestly? Review your options. Your contract allows for 30-day termination with cause. Service delivery that doesn't match contractual specifications constitutes cause. Dr. Lewiston looked at me for a long moment. Thank you for your honesty. That took courage. Similar conversations unfolded with other clients over the following weeks. The Brennan Logistics account, worth $350,000 annually. Morrison Manufacturing. Riverside Healthcare. The Patterson Group. Stellar Communications. Each conversation followed the same pattern. They expressed concerns, I provided honest assessments, they thanked me for my integrity, but these weren't just one-sided warnings. My clients began confiding things they had never shared before, frustrations that had been building for months, concerns they had hesitated to voice, specific examples of service failures that went beyond what I had already documented. The Patterson Group CEO, William Patterson, told me about billing irregularities his accounting team had identified. We're being charged for consultation hours during weeks when no one from Hartwell Associates contacted us. When we asked about it, we were told it was background research and strategic planning on our behalf. Stellar Communications had discovered that their custom market analysis was identical to reports provided to 3 other clients, with only company names changed. The CEO, Maria Santos, had copies of all 4 reports, obtained through industry connections, and the similarities were undeniable. These revelations painted a picture of systematic fraud that went far beyond corner-cutting or efficiency improvements. The firm was charging premium rates for services they weren't providing, delivering generic work at custom prices, and using client relationships to prevent scrutiny of their practices, but the most damaging information came from an unexpected source, the firm's own junior associates. Several of them had been asking me for career advice, sensing that something was wrong with their assignments but not understanding the bigger picture. One associate, fresh out of college, confided that she had been instructed to bill senior consultant hours for work she performed as an intern. Another mentioned being asked to copy and paste sections from old reports into new client analyses. A third described being told to inflate time estimates for projects that took half the reported hours to complete. They thought these were normal business practices, industry standards they needed to accept. I realized they were unwitting participants in a fraud scheme that could destroy their professional reputations if it came to light. By December, I had documented evidence of billing fraud, service misrepresentation, and contract violations affecting 14 major accounts representing $3.2 million in annual revenue. But more importantly, I had established relationships of trust and honesty with clients who were growing increasingly frustrated with Hartwell Associates' deteriorating service quality. They were looking for alternatives. They were ready for change. They just needed someone they trusted to show them a better path forward. They had no idea how soon that opportunity would present itself. The falsified billing statement that would ultimately bring down Hartwell Associates landed on my desk by mistake on a gray January morning. It was meant for Kevin Dalton, but our names were adjacent on the internal distribution list and administrative Errors were common enough that I opened it without thinking. What I found inside made my hands shake. The document was a client billing reconciliation report for the Morrison manufacturing account, showing charges for November and December. According to the statement, Helena Cross had provided 47 hours of senior strategic consultation during November, including 3 on-site visits and extensive market analysis research. I stared at the numbers, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. During November, I had been deliberately excluded from Morrison account activities. Kevin had taken over all client contact, citing the need for leadership transition and my overly personal approach to client relationships. I had provided exactly 0 hours of consultation to Morrison Manufacturing in November, or any month since October, but here was an official billing document, bearing my name and professional credentials, charging Janet Morrison's company $8,200 for work I had never performed. I printed the document immediately, then checked the firm's internal billing system to see if this was an isolated error. What I discovered was far worse than a simple mistake. Systematic billing fraud was happening across multiple accounts. My name appeared on invoices for Riverside Healthcare, charging 28 hours of consultation during a month when I had been attending a conference in another state. The Patterson Group was being billed for Helena Cross strategic planning sessions that had never occurred. Stellar Communications was charged for my market analysis research during a week when I had been home with the FLU.in total. My name and credentials were being used to fraudulently bill clients for over $45,000 worth of services I had never provided, but the fraud went deeper than misattributed work. The firm was creating fictional service descriptions to justify premium charges. Strategic market positioning analysis was actually basic industry research performed by interns. Executive-level consultation referred to 20-minute phone calls handled by junior associates. Custom solution development described template modifications that took less than an hour to complete. I spent the weekend creating a comprehensive analysis of the billing fraud, cross-referencing internal time records with client invoices and service delivery reports. The pattern was undeniable and systematic. Hartwell Associates was stealing millions of dollars from clients through fraudulent billing practices that violated both contractual agreements and federal fraud statutes. Monday morning brought a partners meeting that I wasn't supposed to attend, but the conference room door was ajar and voices carried clearly into the hallway where I was retrieving files from the storage room. Client complaints are escalating, Richard Hartwell was saying. Morrison, Riverside, Patterson, they're all asking detailed questions about billing and service delivery. Someone's been feeding them information. It has to be Helena. Kevin's voice was tight with frustration. These clients trust her completely. If she's undermining our efficiency initiatives, we need to be very careful here, Marcus interrupted. Helena has relationships that represent significant revenue. We can't just eliminate her without considering the fallout. Actually, we can. Richard's voice carried a cold calculation that made my stomach clench. If client complaints continue to escalate, we need a scapegoat. Someone to blame for service delivery issues while we implement damage control. There was a pause, then Kevin spoke again. You're talking about firing Helena? I'm talking about strategic positioning. If clients are unhappy with service quality, we blame it on individual performance failures rather than systemic issues. Helena becomes the cause of problems rather than the solution. We position her termination as corrective action to address client concerns. Marcus sounded uncertain, but her performance reviews have been excellent. Her client retention rates can be spun as overdependence and failure to implement proper systems. Richard cut him off. We document performance issues, cite failure to adapt to new efficiency protocols, and present her termination as necessary for improved service delivery. My knees felt weak as the implications hit me. They weren't just planning to fire me, they were planning to frame me as the cause of problems they had created. The service delivery issues, billing irregularities, and client complaints would all be attributed to my performance failures rather than their systematic fraud, but they had made one critical miscalculation. The clients they were planning to deceive about my performance issues knew the truth about my work quality and integrity. They had been confiding in me for months about the real problems with Hartwell Associates service delivery. That evening, I made copies of every piece of evidence I had collected: voice recordings, billing documents, service delivery reports, client communications, and internal memos. I stored the originals in a safety deposit box and kept copies in 3 separate locations. If they were going to use me as a scapegoat, they would discover that this scapegoat had teeth. The final piece of their setup came 2 weeks later, a performance improvement plan that documented vague concerns about my adaptation to evolving service delivery models and client relationship management approaches that may impede operational efficiency. I signed the document because refusing would have accelerated their timeline. But I also recorded the meeting where it was presented, capturing Richard Hartwell's careful explanation of how my personal approach to client relationships was becoming problematic for the firm's growth strategy. They were building their narrative systematically, creating documentation that would justify my termination and support their claims about performance-based service issues. What they didn't know was that I was building a much more comprehensive narrative of my own. The termination letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by Marcus Brennan with the solemnity of a funeral director. The official reason cited, failure to adapt to evolving service delivery standards and persistent client relationship management issues that impede operational efficiency. I read it twice while Marcus sat across from my desk, his expression carefully neutral. 7 years of exceptional performance reviews, client retention rates that exceeded industry standards, and revenue generation that had helped fund their golden boys' salaries, all reduced to bureaucratic language about operational impediments. This is effective immediately? I asked, keeping my voice steady. I'm afraid so. Richard felt that given the recent client complaints and service delivery challenges, continuing under current circumstances would be detrimental to both the firm and your professional development. Professional development. The phrase would have been laughable if it weren't so calculating. They were positioning my termination as a favor, a necessary step for my own career growth. I'll need to collect my personal items and transition my active files, I said. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Actually, we've arranged for your personal items to be packaged and sent to you. Security protocols require that terminated employees not access client files or internal systems after notification. Security protocols. For an employee who had never violated a single company policy, never missed a deadline, never compromised client confidentiality. The implication was clear: I was being treated as a potential threat, someone who might steal information or sabotage operations out of spite. The cruel irony was that they were right to be worried about information theft, just not in the way they imagined. There's one more thing, Marcus continued, pulling out a document marked Confidential Settlement Agreement. The firm is prepared to offer a generous severance package in exchange for your agreement to certain non-disclosure and non-compete provisions. I scanned the document quickly. The generous severance amounted to 6 weeks of salary. In exchange, I would agree not to discuss my employment experience, client relationships, or any internal firm operations for a period of 3 years. I would also agree not to solicit any Hartwell Associates clients or employees during that same period. They were trying to buy my silence and eliminate me as competitive threat for the price of 6 weeks' salary. I need time to review this with legal counsel, I said. Marcus's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course. But I should mention that the offer is time-sensitive. If not accepted within 48 hours, the severance package won't be available. Pressure tactics. They wanted me gone and silent before I had time to think clearly or seek advice. Before I could document what had really happened or communicate with clients who trusted me. I understand, I said, folding the termination letter and settlement agreement carefully. Will I be able to say goodbye to colleagues? Under the circumstances, we think it's best to handle the transition quietly. Your departure will be announced internally as a mutual decision to pursue new opportunities. A mutual decision. Even. My termination would be reframed as something I had chosen, eliminating any suggestion that the firm had failed or mistreated a valued employee. The next hour passed in a surreal haze. Marcus escorted me to the elevator, carrying a small box containing the few personal items from my desk, the photo of my college graduation, a coffee mug from a client appreciation event, a small succulent plant that had somehow survived the office's fluorescent lighting. As we waited for the elevator, I could see colleagues in the main office area, some working at their desks, others clustered around the coffee station. None of them looked in our direction. Whether they knew what was happening or were simply absorbed in their own tasks, the effect was the same. My 7 years at Hartwell Associates was ending without acknowledgement or farewell. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. As the doors opened, Marcus handed me the box and extended his hand for a professional handshake. Best of luck with your future endeavors, Helena. I'm sure you'll find something that's a better fit. A better fit. As if my exceptional performance had been a problem of incompatibility rather than their systematic exploitation of my competence and relationships. I shook his hand and stepped into the elevator. As the doors closed, I caught a glimpse of the office that had been my professional home for 7 years, the conference rooms where I had negotiated major contracts, the desk where I had built relationships with clients who trusted me, the workspace where I had generated millions in revenue while watching less qualified colleagues advance past me. The elevator descended in silence, carrying me toward an uncertain future but also toward something they hadn't anticipated: the freedom to act without corporate loyalty constraints. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with the termination letter spread before me, along with copies of the evidence I had been collecting for months. The contrast was stark: their careful documentation of my alleged failures versus the comprehensive record of their actual fraud and deception. They had positioned me as the problem, the employee whose performance issues necessitated termination, for the good of client relationships. But the clients they claimed to be protecting knew the truth about my work quality and integrity. They had been confiding in me about the real problems with service delivery, billing irregularities, and declining support quality. I thought about Janet Morrison's handwritten thank you note, still tucked in my wallet: "Thank you for finally telling me the truth. Your integrity means more than you know." Dr. Patricia Lewiston's direct question echoed in my memory: "Is your firm cutting corners on our account?" And my honest answer that had earned her respect and trust. William Patterson's revelations about billing irregularities. Maria Santos's discovery of identical, custom reports. The junior associates' unwitting participation in fraudulent billing practices. They had intended to make me a scapegoat, someone to blame for systemic problems while they continued their deceptive practices. But a scapegoat needs to be isolated and powerless to be effective. They had miscalculated my relationships with the very clients they planned to deceive about my departure. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts, not the official client database that they had already revoked my access to, but my personal phone with numbers I had collected. 3 years of genuine relationship building. Janet Morrison. Dr. Patricia Lewiston. William Patterson. Maria Santos. 14 other clients who had confided their concerns and trusted me with their frustrations about Hartwell Associates' declining service quality. They thought they were eliminating a threat to their operations. Instead, they had just freed their most knowledgeable critic from any obligation to protect their reputation. The settlement agreement sat unsigned on my table, its non-disclosure and non-compete clauses designed to ensure my silence and eliminate me as competition. 6 weeks of salary in exchange for 3 years of silence about systematic fraud affecting millions of dollars in client billings. I had 48 hours to decide whether to accept their offer or chart a different course entirely. The choice was clearer than they could have imagined. The security escort's badge number was 247. I found myself focusing on that detail as he walked beside me through the main office area, his presence announcing to everyone that I was being removed under circumstances requiring supervision. Badge 247, a small metal rectangle that somehow symbolized how I had been reduced from a trusted senior manager to a potential security threat in the span of one conversation. It was 10:47 a.m. on a Tuesday when my career at Hartwell Associates officially ended. The timing was deliberate, late enough that most staff were settled at their desks, early enough that client meetings were in full swing. Maximum visibility for my departure, maximum impact for the message they wanted to send. Kevin Dalton emerged from Richard Hartwell's office as we passed, his expression a carefully constructed mask of professional regret. But I caught something else in his eyes: satisfaction, relief, maybe even a hint of triumph. The problem employee was finally being eliminated, clearing the path for the Golden Boys to implement their efficiency initiatives without interference. "Such a shame," I heard someone whisper as we passed the cluster of desks near the research department. "I thought she was doing well." "Apparently there were performance issues," came the response. "Client complaints about service quality." The narrative was already being established, spreading through the office like a controlled burn. My termination wasn't arbitrary or unjust, it was necessary corrective action to address documented problems. By the end of the day, the entire office would know that Helena Cross had been terminated due to performance failures that were affecting client relationships. Margaret from accounting looked up from her computer as we passed, her expression confused and sympathetic. We had worked together on client billing reconciliations for 5 years. She knew the quality of my work, the precision of my documentation, the care I took with every detail. Her confused expression told me that the official narrative didn't match what she had observed, but Margaret was just one person, and she worked in accounting rather than client services. Her opinion would carry little weight against the partner's carefully constructed explanation for my departure. The elevator ride down felt endless. Badge 247 stood silently beside me, professional and impersonal. I wondered how many other employees he had escorted out over the years, how many careers had ended with the same ritual of supervised departure. As the elevator descended, I thought about the last client presentation I had given, just 2 weeks earlier, a quarterly review for Riverside Healthcare that had gone exceptionally well. Dr. Lewiston had specifically praised my analysis and requested that I lead their next strategic planning session. That request was now moot, of course. She would be told that I was no longer with the firm, that someone else would be taking over her account. She wouldn't be told about the performance issues or client complaints that allegedly necessitated my termination. She would simply be informed that personnel changes were part of the firm's ongoing commitment to service excellence. The elevator doors opened onto the lobby, and I felt a strange sense of finality. 7 years of walking through these doors each morning, greeting the security desk, riding up to begin another day of building relationships and solving problems. All of that was ending with a supervised walk to the exit, but as we approached the lobby doors, something unexpected happened. The elevator behind us chimed, and I heard voices, familiar voices of people I knew but couldn't immediately identify. Helena? I turned to see Janet Morrison stepping out of the elevator, her expression concerned and confused. What's happening? Are you leaving? Behind her came Dr. Patricia Lewiston, William Patterson, and Maria Santos. A client meeting. I suddenly remembered seeing it on the shared calendar. A group presentation about industry trends and strategic positioning. Point 4 of my most important clients. Witnessing my security escorted departure in real time, the moment stretched awkwardly as badge 247 looked uncertain about protocol. This wasn't covered in the security manual. What to do when important clients witnessed a supervised termination. I'm no longer with Hartwell Associates, I said simply, keeping my voice steady and professional. The confusion on their faces was immediate and profound. These were clients who had worked with me for years, who trusted my judgment and relied on my expertise. They knew the quality of my work firsthand. Performance issues, badge 247 said quietly, apparently deciding that some explanation was necessary. Company policy requires supervised departure. I watched as Janet Morrison's expression shifted from confusion to something that looked like recognition. She remembered our honest conversations about service quality degradation. She knew about the billing irregularities her accounting team had discovered. Dr. Lewiston's face showed similar understanding. She had asked me directly about corner cutting and received truthful answers that contradicted the firm's official messaging. I see, Janet said slowly, her voice carrying a weight that made badge 247 shift uncomfortably. We reached the lobby doors, and badge 247 held one open for me. As I stepped outside into the cool morning air, I heard Dr. Lewiston's voice behind me. This is very interesting timing. I didn't turn around, but I could feel the weight of their attention as I walked away from the building that had defined my professional life for 7 years. My clients, former clients, had witnessed my departure under circumstances that painted me as a failed employee whose performance issues necessitated immediate termination, but they knew better. They knew the quality of my work, the integrity of my service, and the honesty of my communications about their accounts. They had seen the evidence of declining service quality and billing irregularities that contradicted everything Hartwell Associates claimed about their operations. My humiliation was complete, but it had happened in front of exactly the right audience. I made it exactly 3 blocks before my phone started ringing. Janet Morrison's name appeared on the screen before I had even reached my car. Helena, we need to talk. All of us. Can you meet somewhere private? Her voice carried an urgency I had never heard before, a controlled intensity that suggested this wasn't a casual follow-up conversation. I'm not sure that's appropriate, I said carefully. There may be legal complications with my former employment, Helena. Janet's voice cut through my hesitation. We just watched you get escorted out by security while we were told you have performance issues. We know that's bullshit. We need to understand what's really happening. 30 minutes later, I sat in a corner booth at Madison's Cafe, a quiet restaurant 6 blocks from Hartwell Associates, facing 4 of my former clients. They had arrived separately, but each had called me within minutes of my departure. Word had spread quickly through their impromptu client meeting after I left. Dr. Patricia Lewiston spoke first, her voice carrying the same direct authority that made her an effective hospital administrator. Helena, we've all had conversations with you over the past months about service quality issues at Hartwell Associates. You've been honest with us about problems that other people at the firm have tried to hide or minimize. Extremely honest, added William Patterson. You told us things that directly contradicted what we were hearing from our account managers. Janet Morrison placed a business card on the table between us, my business card, the one from my desk at Hartwell Associates. You gave this to me 4 years ago when we first started working together. I've kept it in my wallet ever since because you told me to call you directly if we ever had concerns about our service. I remembered that conversation, early in our professional relationship when I was establishing trust and demonstrating my commitment to their success. Well, I'm calling, Janet continued. Not about service concerns, about employment concerns. We want to understand what happened in there, and we want to know what options we have. Maria Santos from Stellar Communications leaned forward. Helena, you've always shot straight with us. Even when it made your own company look bad. That's rare in this business. I looked around the table at 4 successful business leaders who had taken time out of their schedules to meet with a recently terminated employee. Their presence here represented a significant risk. Meeting with a former service provider could be seen as improper, especially if there were legal issues surrounding the termination. I need to be very careful about what I say, I began slowly. My employment ended this morning, and there are potential confidentiality issues. Screw confidentiality, Dr. Lewiston interrupted. They just humiliated you in front of us after months of telling us that you were the source of our service problems. We deserve to know what's actually going on. I took a deep breath and made a decision that would change everything. What's going on is systematic fraud. Billing fraud, service misrepresentation, and contractual violations that affect every major account at the firm. The silence that followed was profound. For experienced business leaders processing the implications of what I had just said, Janet spoke first. Can you prove it? Yes. How much fraud are we talking about? William asked. Based on my analysis, approximately $400,000 annually across 14 major accounts. Charges for services never provided, billing senior consultant time for intern work, identical reports. Sold as custom analysis. Maria Santos pulled out her phone and started taking notes. We need details. Specific examples, documentation, everything you can provide. Maria, I said carefully, I need to understand what you're thinking. This isn't just about getting better service or negotiating contract modifications. If we're talking about documented fraud, this becomes a legal matter with serious consequences. Dr. Lewiston's expression was grim but determined. Helena, Riverside Healthcare has a fiduciary responsibility to our patients and shareholders. If we're being systematically defrauded by a service provider, we have an obligation to address it legally and financially. Same for Morrison Manufacturing, Janet added. We can't ignore fraud just because it's convenient or because changing providers is complicated. Over the next hour, I shared specific examples of billing irregularities, service misrepresentations, and contractual violations that I had documented. I showed them copies of fraudulent invoices bearing my name for work I had never performed. I explained the systematic reduction of service quality while maintaining premium pricing, but more importantly, I watched as 4 intelligent business leaders connected the dots between their individual experiences and the broader pattern of deception. The identical reports, Maria said suddenly. You're saying our custom market analysis was literally copied and pasted from other clients? With only company names and basic demographics changed. The strategic recommendations were identical, even when they didn't apply to your specific industry challenges. William Patterson was reviewing his notes. And the billing irregularities my accounting team found, charges for consultation during weeks when no one contacted us, that's systematic? Across multiple accounts. Fictitious service descriptions, inflated time estimates, charges for work performed by unpaid interns. Dr. Lewiston looked up from her phone, where she had been typing rapidly. I'm scheduling an emergency meeting with our legal counsel and accounting team. We need to review every invoice and service delivery report from the past 18 months. I'm doing the same, Janet said. And I'm calling our other vendors to see if anyone else has experienced similar issues with Hartwell Associates. As the meeting continued, something remarkable happened. These 4 business leaders began coordinating their response in real time. Phone numbers were exchanged, legal counsel recommendations shared, documentation strategies discussed. We need to be systematic about this, Dr. Lewiston said, taking charge with the same decisiveness that made her an effective administrator. If we're going to challenge a well-established firm like Hartwell Associates, we need irrefutable evidence and coordinated action. Agreed, William said. Individual complaints can be dismissed as misunderstandings or isolated incidents. But if multiple major clients present similar evidence simultaneously, it becomes impossible to ignore or explain away. Maria finished. Janet Morrison pulled out a small notebook and began writing names and numbers. Helena, you mentioned 14 major accounts with similar issues. Do you have contact information for the other clients? I hesitated. Providing client contact information could be seen as a violation of confidentiality agreements, even after termination. But these weren't random business prospects. They were clients who had specifically confided their concerns to me and requested honest assessments of their service experience. I can't provide contact information directly, I said carefully. But I can tell you that several other clients have expressed similar concerns about billing irregularities and service quality issues. Can you reach out to them? Dr. Lewiston asked. Not to coordinate our response, but to let them know that other clients are investigating similar issues? It was a fine legal distinction, but an important one. I wouldn't be soliciting clients or coordinating a group response. I would simply be informing concerned clients that they weren't alone in their experiences. I think that would be appropriate, I said. Maria Santos closed her notebook and looked around the table. I want to be very clear about what we're discussing here. We're talking about potentially ending business relationships that represent significant value to our companies. This isn't just about getting better service, it's about holding a service provider accountable for fraudulent practices. And supporting someone who had the integrity to tell us the truth when she could have stayed quiet and kept her job, Janet added, looking directly at me. The weight of their support was overwhelming. For successful business leaders were willing to risk complicated transitions and potential legal battles because they believed in my integrity and were appalled by what they had witnessed. There's something else you should know, I said quietly. Hartwell Associates offered me a settlement agreement with a non-disclosure clause. 6 weeks of severance in exchange for 3 years of silence about everything we've discussed today. Dr. Lewiston's expression darkened. They're trying to buy your silence about fraud. How long do you have to respond? William asked. 48 hours. Don't sign it, Maria said immediately. If what you've told us is accurate, that settlement agreement is designed to prevent you from cooperating with investigations or providing evidence of criminal activity. Janet Morrison reached into her purse and pulled out her business card, not the standard corporate card, but a personal card with her direct phone number and email address. Helena, I want you to have this. Not as a client, but as someone who respects what you did today. You risked everything to tell us the truth, and that matters more than you know. One by one, the others followed suit. Personal contact information, direct phone numbers, private email addresses. These weren't business cards being exchanged between service provider and client, they were personal connections being established between people who had found common ground in a commitment to honesty and accountability. As we prepared to leave, Dr. Lewiston asked one final question. Helena, what do you need from us? How can we support you through whatever comes next? The question caught me off guard. I had expected anger about the fraud, concern about their business relationships, maybe gratitude for my honesty. I hadn't expected offers of personal support from people I had known only in professional contexts. Right now, I just need to know that telling the truth was the right choice, I said. It was, Janet said without hesitation. And we're going to make sure everyone knows it. The mass resignation letter arrived at Hartwell Associates at 4:47 p.m. on Wednesday, exactly 31 hours after my termination. It was delivered simultaneously to Richard Hartwell, the firm's legal counsel, and the state regulatory board that oversaw consulting practices. The letter was brief, professional, and devastating. We, the undersigned clients of Hartwell Associates, hereby provide 30-day notice of contract termination due to material breaches of service agreements, including but not limited to, systematic billing for services not provided, delivery of generic work products misrepresented as custom analysis, and fraudulent representation of consultant qualifications and service hours. We have documented evidence of these practices and will be pursuing appropriate legal remedies. Our decision follows the recent termination of Helena Cross, whose integrity and honesty provided the only reliable service quality at your firm. 15. Signatures followed, representing $3.2 million in annual revenue. I learned about the letter from Janet Morrison, who called me at 5:15 p.m. with barely controlled excitement in her voice. Helena, you need to know what just happened. We coordinated with the other clients you mentioned, and every single one of them had identical experiences with billing fraud and service degradation. Every single one. The response had been faster and more comprehensive than I had imagined possible. After our meeting at Madison's Cafe, the 4 original clients had reached out to others who had expressed concerns. The conversations revealed a pattern of fraud so systematic and widespread that it constituted criminal enterprise rather than isolated incidents. How many clients total? I asked. 15 so far, but more are coming forward. The Patterson Group contacted 3 other manufacturing companies who use Hartwell Associates, and they all have similar stories. Dr. Lewiston reached out through hospital administrator networks, same pattern. Word is spreading through business communities faster than wildfire. My phone buzzed with an incoming call. Janet, I need to take this. It's Dr. Lewiston. Helena, Dr. Lewiston's voice was crisp and businesslike. I wanted you to know that Riverside Healthcare has scheduled an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning to review our relationship with Hartwell Associates. Our legal counsel has advised us that the billing irregularities you documented constitute grounds for immediate contract termination and potential civil action. How are they responding to the resignations? Panic. Richard Hartwell called me personally 20 minutes ago, offering significant service improvements and billing credits. When I mentioned specific examples of fraudulent charges, he claimed they were administrative errors that could be corrected immediately. Administrative errors. 7 months of systematic fraud across 15 major accounts, dismissed as clerical mistakes that could be fixed with an apology and some billing adjustments. What did you tell him? That administrative errors don't explain why I was charged for consultation services during a week when I was attending a medical conference in another country. Or why our custom strategic analysis was identical to reports provided to 3 other healthcare systems. Over the following hours, my phone rang constantly. Former clients calling to share their experiences, ask questions about documentation, and coordinate their responses to Hartwell Associates' increasingly desperate damage control efforts. William Patterson called at 7:30 p.m. Helena, you need to know that Kevin Dalton just offered Morrison Manufacturing a 40% discount on all future services if we withdraw our termination notice. When we refused, he suggested that our complaints were based on misunderstandings, encouraged by a disgruntled former employee. A disgruntled former employee. They were positioning me as the source of client dissatisfaction, someone who had poisoned relationships out of spite after being legitimately terminated for performance issues. What was your response? I told him that the disgruntled former employee was the only person at his firm who had been honest with us about what we were actually receiving for our money. Then I hung up. Maria Santos called 40 minutes later with a similar story. Marcus Brennan just spent an hour trying to convince me that the identical reports were part of an industry best practices template that provided consistent quality across accounts. When I pointed out that the recommendations made no sense for our specific business model, he claimed there had been communication errors in our needs assessment. The firm's response was predictable but legally dangerous. Instead of acknowledging the systematic nature of their fraudulent practices, they were doubling down on explanations that could be easily disproven with documentation. But the most revealing call came from an unexpected source, Margaret from accounting, who reached me on my personal phone at 9:45 p.m. Helena, I hope it's okay that I'm calling. I got your number from the office directory before today. Margaret's voice was nervous but determined. I need you to know that after you left, there was an emergency partners meeting. I was asked to pull billing records for all the clients who signed that letter. What did you find? Everything you said was true. The fraudulent billing, the misrepresented services, the fictional time entries, it's all documented in our internal systems. They've been doing this for at least 2 years. 2 years. The fraud was even more extensive than I had realized. Margaret, are you in trouble for looking at those records? Probably. But Helena, I've been processing these invoices for 5 years. I knew something was wrong, but I thought it was just aggressive accounting practices. When I saw the actual scope of what they were doing, her voice trailed off. What are you going to do? I'm meeting with a lawyer tomorrow. If this goes to criminal investigation, I need to make sure I'm protected as a whistleblower rather than an accomplice. As I hung up, I realized that Hartwell Associates was facing something they had never anticipated: coordinated resistance from clients who had evidence, documentation, and the financial resources to pursue legal action. The resignation letter wasn't just a business decision, it was the opening move in a systematic dismantling of their fraudulent operations. My termination, intended to eliminate a threat and provide a scapegoat for client complaints, had instead freed their most knowledgeable critic and galvanized their most valuable clients into coordinated action. The reckoning they had tried to avoid by firing me was now inevitable. And it was going to be far more comprehensive than they could have imagined. The complete documentation file I delivered to the State Regulatory Board on Friday morning contained 247 pages of evidence, organized into 12 categories of fraudulent practices. I had spent 2 sleepless nights compiling everything I had collected over the past 8 months, cross-referencing internal documents with client communications and billing records. The cover letter was simple and direct. The enclosed documentation provides evidence of systematic fraud perpetrated by Hartwell Associates against multiple clients over a period of at least 2 years. This evidence includes voice recordings of partners discussing deliberate client deception, falsified billing statements, and internal communications acknowledging fraudulent practices. Section 1 contained the voice recordings, 17 separate conversations I had captured, including the original discussion about using my credibility to deceive clients and more recent emergency meetings about damage control. The audio quality was excellent, and the voices were clearly identifiable. Section 2 documented billing fraud across 15 client accounts, with side-by-side comparisons of contractual agreements, internal time records, and actual invoices. The discrepancies were staggering in their scope and consistency. Section 3 provided evidence of service misrepresentation, including copies of custom reports that were identical across multiple clients, documentation of intern work billed at senior consultant rates, and emails acknowledging the use of automated templates for premium analysis services. But perhaps the most damaging evidence was in Section 4, internal communications that explicitly acknowledged fraudulent practices and discussed strategies for avoiding detection. An email from Kevin Dalton to Marcus Brennan, dated 3 months earlier: "We need to be more careful about billing overlap. Helena's been asking questions about time allocations, and she has access to too many internal systems." A memo from Richard Hartwell outlining the efficiency initiative: "Client retention rates suggest we can reduce service delivery by 30 to 40% without significant defection risk. Maintain premium pricing through strategic relationship management and billing optimization." A recorded phone conversation between Marcus and Kevin discussing my impending termination: "The fraud exposure ends when Helena's gone. She's the only one who understands the full scope of what we're doing." I delivered copies to 3 different agencies simultaneously: the State Consulting Board, the Attorney General's Office, and the Federal Trade Commission. Each package was identical, ensuring that no single agency could bury or minimize the investigation. The response was immediate and overwhelming. By 2 p.m. Friday, I received a call from Special Agent Sarah Chen at the State Attorney General's Economic Crimes Unit. "Ms. Cross, we've reviewed your submission. We need to schedule an interview as soon as possible. How soon can you be available?" "I'm available now." "Excellent. Can you be here by 4 p.m.? And please bring any additional documentation you haven't already provided." The interview lasted 3 hours. Agent Chen and her partner, Detective Mike Rodriguez, went through my evidence systematically, asking detailed questions about how I had obtained each piece of documentation, when specific conversations had occurred, and what I knew about the firm's other business practices. "Ms. Cross," Agent Chen said as the interview concluded, "I need to be clear about what happens next. This investigation will likely result in criminal charges against multiple individuals at Hartwell Associates. You may be called to testify in both criminal and civil proceedings. Are you prepared for that level of involvement?" "Yes. There may also be retaliation attempts. Has anyone from the firm contacted you since your termination?" "Several calls from partners offering settlement negotiations. I haven't responded to any of them." Detective Rodriguez leaned forward. "What kind of settlement offers?" "Increasing amounts of severance money in exchange for signing non-disclosure agreements. The most recent offer was 12 weeks of salary plus benefits continuation." "They're trying to buy your silence," Agent Chen observed. "How have you responded?" "I haven't. My attorney advised me not to engage in any settlement discussions while potential criminal activity is under investigation." At 7:30 p.m., as I was driving home from the Attorney General's office, my phone rang. Richard Hartwell's name appeared on the screen. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message in my driveway: "Helena, this is Richard. I think there may be some misunderstandings about your departure and the client situation. I'd like to meet with you privately to discuss a mutually beneficial resolution. We're prepared to offer a substantial settlement package that would be in everyone's best interest. Please call me back as soon as possible." A substantial settlement package. The offers were escalating as the legal pressure increased, but the message contained something else that made my blood run cold: an implicit threat wrapped in diplomatic language. Mutually beneficial resolution and everyone's best interest suggested consequences if I didn't cooperate with their damage control efforts. I forwarded the voicemail to Agent Chen immediately, along with a text message: "They're escalating pressure for settlement negotiations. Should I respond?" Her reply came within minutes: "Do not engage. Forward any additional contact attempts. This voicemail will be added to evidence file." Saturday morning brought a development I hadn't anticipated. Margaret from accounting called with information that changed everything we thought we knew about the scope of the fraud. "Helena, I've been going through archived files from the past 3 years. The billing fraud isn't limited to the 15 clients who resigned. It's happening across every major account at the firm." "How many accounts total?" 43 active clients, representing approximately $8.2 million in annual revenue. The fraudulent billing appears to be generating about $2.4 million in false charges annually. $2.4 million in annual fraud. The scope was far beyond what any of us had realized. "Margaret, have you shared this with anyone else?" My attorney advised me to provide everything to the regulatory board and law enforcement. "I'm meeting with Agent Chen Monday morning. Are you safe? Is the firm pressuring you?" "They fired me yesterday. Personnel restructuring due to changing business needs." but I kept copies of everything. The firm was eliminating anyone with knowledge of their internal operations, trying to minimize potential witnesses and evidence sources. But they had made a critical error. They were creating additional victims and witnesses rather than eliminating exposure. Margaret's firing would only strengthen the prosecution's case by demonstrating a pattern of retaliation against anyone who might cooperate with investigations. Sunday evening, I received a call from Dr. Patricia Lewiston with news that marked a turning point in our coordinated resistance. Helena, Riverside Healthcare's board met in emergency session today. We've voted unanimously to pursue criminal fraud charges against Hartwell and Associates in addition to civil litigation for recovery of fraudulent billing. Our legal counsel estimates we were overcharged by approximately $180,000 over the past 18 months. How many other clients are pursuing similar action? All 15 who signed the resignation letter, plus 6 additional clients who came forward after news of the investigation spread. Combined, we're talking about fraudulent charges exceeding $1.2 million across 21 clients. The investigation that had begun with my documentation was expanding into a comprehensive criminal case involving multiple law enforcement agencies, regulatory boards, and civil litigation teams. Hartwell and Associates was facing the complete dismantling of their business, criminal prosecution of their partners, and financial liability that would likely exceed their ability to pay. My evidence file had become the foundation for what prosecutors were calling one of the largest professional services fraud cases in state history. The new business license arrived in my mailbox on a Wednesday morning 3 weeks after my termination, bearing the official seal that made Cross Strategic Consulting a legal entity. I held the document in my hands, feeling the weight of both possibility and terror that comes with complete professional independence. Starting my own consulting practice had never been part of my career plan. I had always imagined climbing the corporate ladder, eventually making partner at a prestigious firm, building security through institutional affiliation. The idea of working for myself, of being responsible for every client relationship, every business decision, every financial outcome, had seemed impossibly risky, but risk is relative. After 8 months of documenting systematic fraud while maintaining a facade of corporate loyalty, the prospect of building something honest and transparent felt like freedom rather than uncertainty. My first client meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 10 a.m. Janet Morrison from Morrison Manufacturing had called 2 days after the business license was approved. Helena, we've terminated our contract with Hartwell and Associates, obviously. But we still need strategic planning and market analysis support. We'd like to discuss engaging Cross Strategic Consulting for those services. Janet, I appreciate the confidence, but you should know that I'm a one-person operation right now. No team, no office infrastructure, no established systems. Helena, that's exactly what we want. One person who takes responsibility for the work, who we can trust to tell us the truth, who understands our business because she's been paying attention for 4 years. When can we meet? The meeting took place at Morrison Manufacturing's headquarters, in the same conference room where I had first presented strategic recommendations as a Hartwell and Associates representative. But everything felt different now, cleaner, more direct, built on honesty rather than corporate positioning. Here's what we're thinking, Janet said, sliding a proposal across the table. 20 hours monthly of strategic consultation, quarterly market analysis reports, and ongoing support for special projects. Same scope of work you were providing before, but with clear deliverables and transparent billing. The contract terms were straightforward and fair, actually more generous than what I had been providing through Hartwell and Associates, but at half the cost to Morrison Manufacturing. Janet, I need to be completely transparent about something. I've never run my own business before. I'm learning as I go with everything from invoicing software to liability insurance. We know. That's part of why we want to work with you. You're building something new, and you're doing it the right way. We want to support that. By the end of the week, I had signed contracts with 4 former Hartwell and Associates clients: Morrison Manufacturing, Riverside Healthcare, the Patterson Group, and Stellar Communications. Combined, they represented $180,000 in annual revenue, enough to cover my basic expenses while I developed additional client relationships, but more importantly, they represented something I had never experienced in corporate consulting: clients who chose to work with me specifically, rather than with the firm that employed me. They valued my individual judgment, trusted my personal integrity, and wanted to support my professional independence. The early weeks were a crash course in entrepreneurship. I learned about business licensing, professional liability insurance, accounting software, and tax obligations. I set up a home office in my spare bedroom, complete with professional lighting for video calls and a dedicated phone line for client communications. Every aspect of the business was transparent and honest, a direct contrast to the deceptive practices I had documented at Hartwell Associates. Client contracts specified exactly what work would be performed, by whom, and at what cost. Time tracking was detailed and accurate. Reports were genuinely custom, addressing each client's specific challenges and opportunities. The difference in client satisfaction was immediate and profound. Without corporate overhead, bureaucratic approval processes, or pressure to maximize billable hours, I could focus entirely on delivering value. Client problems got solved faster, recommendations were more practical and actionable, and relationships deepened through direct communication rather than filtered corporate messaging. Dr. Patricia Lewiston from Riverside Healthcare captured the difference perfectly during our first quarterly review. Helena, this is what consulting should be. Clear communication, practical solutions, honest assessment of challenges and opportunities. No corporate jargon, no inflated timelines, no mysterious billing charges. But building cross-strategic consulting wasn't just about replicating the client service model I had always wanted to provide. It was about creating something that could grow sustainably while maintaining the integrity and transparency that had motivated my departure from Hartwell Associates. By month 3, I was receiving referrals from existing clients. The Patterson Group recommended me to 2 other manufacturing companies. Riverside Healthcare connected me with a regional medical practice network. Stellar Communications introduced me to 3 technology startups that needed strategic planning support. Each new client relationship required careful evaluation, not just of their business needs and my capacity to help, but of whether we shared compatible values about honesty, transparency, and mutual respect. I was building a practice based on trust, and that meant being selective about who I worked with. The financial model was surprisingly robust. Without corporate overhead, partner profit sharing, or expensive office space, I could charge clients significantly less than they had been paying Hartwell Associates while earning more than my previous salary. The economics of honest business were remarkably favorable compared to the financial gymnastics required to support systematic fraud, but perhaps the most rewarding aspect of cross-strategic consulting was the opportunity to mentor other professionals who were questioning corporate cultures that demanded ethical compromises. Margaret from accounting had become a freelance financial consultant specializing in billing accuracy audits. 2 junior associates from Hartwell Associates had left to start their own partnership focused on transparent pricing and honest client communication. We were building a network of professionals who had chosen integrity over institutional security, creating alternatives to the corporate consulting model that had betrayed our values and our clients' trust. 6 months after receiving my business license, cross-strategic consulting had 12 active clients, $340,000 in annual revenue, and a waiting list of prospective clients who had heard about our approach through professional networks. I was no longer an employee hoping for recognition from corporate superiors. I was an entrepreneur building something new, something honest, something that reflected my values rather than compromising them. It was exactly what I hadn't known I wanted until I was forced to discover it. The bankruptcy filing notice appeared in the business section of the state newspaper on a gray Thursday morning in March, exactly 9 months after my termination. The headline was stark and definitive: Hartwell Associates files Chapter 11 following fraud investigation. I read the article twice over my morning coffee, processing the systematic collapse of what had once been considered one of the region's most prestigious consulting firms. The details were comprehensive and damning. Federal investigators had expanded their fraud case to include 67 clients who had been systematically overcharged across a 4-year period. Total fraudulent billing exceeded $4.2 million. Criminal charges had been filed against Richard Hartwell, Kevin Dalton, and Marcus Brennan for conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, and violation of federal business practices statutes. The regulatory board had revoked the firm's consulting license and imposed the maximum possible fines. Civil litigation from defrauded clients had resulted in judgments totaling $6.8 million, far exceeding the firm's assets and insurance coverage, but the numbers only told part of the story. The article included quotes from clients who described feeling betrayed, manipulated, and deceived by people they had trusted with their most important business challenges. "We thought we were getting expert strategic advice," said one anonymous client. "Instead, we were paying premium rates for copy and paste templates prepared by unpaid interns." The human cost was equally significant. 12 employees had lost their jobs when the firm closed, including administrative staff and junior associates who had no knowledge of the fraudulent practices. Several faced difficulty finding new employment due to the association with a firm under federal investigation. I felt a complex mixture of vindication and sadness reading about their difficulties. These were colleagues I had worked with for years. People who had been as deceived by the partners' practices as the clients had been. Their careers were collateral damage in a collapse that could have been prevented if the partners had chosen integrity over greed. The article also detailed the personal consequences for the partners who had orchestrated the fraud. Richard Hartwell faced up to 15 years in federal prison and had been forced to liquidate personal assets to cover legal fees and partial restitution payments. Kevin Dalton had pleaded guilty to reduced charges in exchange for cooperation with investigators, but still faced significant prison time and professional disbarment. Marcus Brennan had attempted to shift responsibility by claiming he was unaware of the systematic nature of the fraud, but prosecutors had voice recordings and internal communications that contradicted his claims. His trial was scheduled for the following month, but perhaps the most telling detail in the article was a quote from the federal prosecutor handling the case. This investigation began when a former employee provided comprehensive documentation of fraudulent practices she had observed. Without that individual's courage and integrity, these crimes would have continued indefinitely. The anonymous reference to my role felt surreal. 9 months earlier, I had been escorted out by security, blamed for client complaints, and painted as a problem employee whose performance issues necessitated immediate termination. Now federal prosecutors were crediting my courage and integrity with exposing crimes that had victimized dozens of clients. That afternoon, I received a call from Agent Chen with an update on the criminal proceedings. "Helena, I wanted you to know that the Hartwell case is proceeding to trial next month. Your testimony will be crucial, particularly the voice recordings and internal documents you provided." "How strong is the case?" "Overwhelming. Between your documentation and the evidence we've gathered from client interviews and financial records, we have multiple counts of fraud with clear intent to deceive. The defense strategy seems to be claiming that these were business practice errors rather than criminal fraud, but the recordings you provided make that argument impossible to sustain." "What about restitution for the clients?" "That's complicated. The firm's assets were insufficient to cover the full extent of fraudulent charges, so clients will recover only partial restitution through the bankruptcy proceedings. But the criminal convictions will help them pursue additional civil remedies against the individual partners." After the call, I spent the evening thinking about the consequences of choices made months earlier. My decision to document fraudulent practices instead of staying silent. The client's decision to investigate and pursue legal action instead of accepting explanations and billing credits. The partner's decision to escalate their fraud instead of addressing systemic problems. Every choice had led to inevitable consequences, creating a chain of events that resulted in the complete destruction of a business and the criminal prosecution of its leaders. But I also thought about the alternatives. What would have happened if I had accepted the settlement agreement and remained silent? The fraud would have continued, eventually victimizing more clients and involving more employees in criminal activity. The partners would have grown bolder, expanding their deceptive practices until an even larger collapse became inevitable. My termination, intended to eliminate a threat and provide a scapegoat for client complaints, had instead accelerated the exposure of crimes that had been hidden for years. 2 weeks later, I received an unexpected call from Margaret, the former accounting employee who had provided crucial documentation to investigators. "Helena, I wanted you to know that I've been hired by the State Regulatory Board as a forensic accounting specialist. They're using the Hartwell case as a model for identifying fraud patterns in other consulting firms." "That's wonderful news. Margaret, you deserve recognition for your courage in coming forward." "I need to thank you, Helena. Watching you choose integrity over security gave me the courage to do the same thing. I wouldn't have spoken up if I hadn't seen your example." As I hung up, I realized that the collapse of Hartwell and Associates had created opportunities for people who shared values of honesty and transparency. Margaret's new role would help protect other clients from similar fraud. The junior associates who had left to start their own firm were building practices based on the lessons learned from our shared experience. The destruction of something corrupt had created space for something better to grow. The bankruptcy filing marked the official end of Hartwell and Associates. But it also represented the beginning of a new professional landscape where integrity was valued over institutional prestige, where honest communication was prioritized over corporate messaging, and where client service meant exactly what it claimed to mean. IT was a better world, built on the ruins of a system that had betrayed everyone it touched. The court settlement document arrived by certified mail on a Friday afternoon in late April, bearing official seals and signatures that marked the legal conclusion of United States versus Hartwell, et al. The final page contained a number that represented both vindication and closure. $2.3 million in restitution payments to defrauded clients. Plus additional penalties and legal fees. Richard Hartwell had been sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $850,000 in personal restitution. Kevin Dalton received 4 years and a $400,000 penalty. Marcus Brennan, whose cooperation with prosecutors had earned him a reduced sentence, faced 2 years in prison and disbarment from practicing consulting services, but the settlement document represented more than financial penalties and prison terms. It included detailed findings of fact that validated everything I had documented and testified about during 18 months of legal proceedings. The defendants engaged in systematic and deliberate fraud, read one section, including billing for services never provided, misrepresenting the qualifications of personnel performing client work, and delivering generic work products falsely marketed as custom analysis. Another section specifically addressed my role in exposing the crimes. The investigation was initiated by comprehensive documentation provided by former employee Helena Cross, whose evidence included voice recordings of defendants discussing fraudulent practices and detailed records of billing irregularities affecting multiple clients. The legal vindication was complete and unambiguous. Federal prosecutors, regulatory boards, and civil courts had all concluded that my allegations were accurate, my documentation was reliable, and my decision to come forward had prevented additional crimes and protected future victims. But perhaps the most meaningful aspect of the settlement was a provision I hadn't expected, a formal acknowledgement that my termination had been retaliatory and illegal, intended to silence someone who posed a threat to ongoing criminal activity. Defendants terminated Ms. Cross in an attempt to prevent her from exposing fraudulent practices to clients and regulatory authorities, the document stated. This termination constituted unlawful retaliation against a whistleblower and violation of employment protection statutes. The personal vindication was overwhelming. After months of being portrayed as a disgruntled employee whose performance issues had necessitated termination, federal courts were now declaring that my firing had been an illegal attempt to cover up criminal activity. The financial component of my settlement was substantial but secondary to the legal validation. I received $180,000 in compensatory damages for lost wages and professional reputation harm, plus attorney fees and costs. But more importantly, the settlement included language that explicitly cleared my professional reputation and acknowledged my integrity. That evening, I called Janet Morrison to share the news. Her response captured what this resolution meant to everyone who had been affected by Hartwell Associates fraud. Helena, this proves what we always knew, that you were the only person at that firm who had the courage to tell the truth. The fact that they went to prison for the same things you warned us about validates every difficult choice you made. Dr. Patricia Lewiston's reaction was equally supportive. This settlement sends a clear message to the entire industry. Clients have rights, fraud has consequences, and employees who expose criminal activity deserve protection rather than retaliation. The impact extended beyond individual vindication. The case had become a landmark precedent for professional services. Fraud prosecution, establishing legal standards that would protect future clients and employees who found themselves in similar situations. Agent Chen called to congratulate me and provide perspective on the broader implications. Helena, this case has already changed how we investigate professional services fraud. Your documentation methods and the systematic way you preserved evidence has become a model for other whistleblower cases. But the most satisfying aspect of the settlement was its impact on the clients who had trusted me with their concerns and supported my decision to expose the fraud. The restitution payments would restore most of what they had lost to fraudulent billing, and the legal precedent would help protect them from similar schemes in the future. Morrison Manufacturing received $127,000 in restitution for documented overcharges. Riverside Healthcare recovered $89,000. The Patterson Group was awarded $76,000. Across all affected clients, the total recovery exceeded $1.8 million in fraudulent charges that would have otherwise gone undetected and unpunished. But beyond the financial recovery, these clients had gained something more valuable: confidence that their concerns had been taken seriously, that justice was possible even against well-established firms, and that integrity still mattered in professional relationships. William Patterson expressed this sentiment perfectly when he called after receiving his restitution payment. Helena, this isn't just about the money we recovered. It's about proving that honest business practices have value and that fraud has real consequences. You gave us the courage to fight back instead of just accepting what was happening. The settlement also included provisions for ongoing monitoring of consulting industry practices, funded by penalties paid by the defendants. New regulatory requirements would mandate clearer billing transparency, regular audits of service delivery claims, and protection for employees who reported suspected fraud. I had testified before the state legislature's Business Practices Committee about the need for stronger whistleblower protections and client rights in professional services. The resulting legislation, known informally as the Hartwell Act, created new safeguards that would make similar fraud schemes much more difficult to sustain. During my testimony, I had emphasized that the real heroes in this case were the clients, who chose to investigate their concerns rather than accept explanations, and the employees like Margaret who provided crucial evidence despite personal risk. This case succeeded because multiple people made difficult but ethical choices, I told the committee. Preventing future fraud requires creating systems that support and protect those choices rather than punishing them. The settlement marked the end of a legal process that had dominated my life for 18 months, but it also represented the beginning of a new phase of professional and personal growth. The validation of my integrity and the financial stability provided by the settlement gave me the confidence to expand cross-strategic consulting and take on more challenging projects. More importantly, the case had connected me with a network of professionals who shared similar values about honesty, transparency, and client service. Former Hartwell Associates employees who had left to start ethical practices, clients who prioritized integrity over prestige, and regulatory officials who were committed to preventing future fraud. We had become an informal community of people who believed that business could be conducted honestly and that professional relationships could be built on trust rather than deception. The final page of the settlement document contained a sentence that encapsulated everything I had learned from this experience. This case demonstrates that individual integrity, when supported by courage and documentation, can prevail against institutional corruption and create lasting positive change. Justice had been served, but more importantly, a new standard had been established for what clients could expect from professional services and what employees owed to their own integrity. The settlement was an ending, but it was also a beginning. The first annual report for cross-strategic consulting arrived from my accountant on a crisp October morning, exactly 1 year after the legal settlement that had closed the Hartwell Associates case. The numbers told a story of growth that exceeded my most optimistic projections: 18 active clients, $485,000 in annual revenue, and a profit margin that allowed for both reinvestment and financial security. But the numbers only captured part of what cross-strategic consulting had become. The real story was in the relationships, the trust, and the sustainable business model built on transparency and genuine value creation. My client roster had evolved far beyond the original Hartwell Associates refugees. Morrison Manufacturing remained a cornerstone account, but I now worked with technology startups, healthcare systems, manufacturing companies, and nonprofit organizations across 3 states. Each relationship had been built through referrals from existing clients who valued honest communication and practical solutions. The referral pattern revealed something important about the consulting market: there was significant unmet demand for practitioners who prioritized client success over billable hours, who provided genuine expertise rather than generic templates, and who communicated honestly about challenges and opportunities. Helena, what you've built is what consulting should have been all along, Dr. Patricia Lewiston had said during our recent strategic planning session. Clear communication, practical solutions, honest assessment of what's possible and what isn't. The business model was deliberately designed to avoid the structural problems that had enabled fraud at Hartwell Associates. Fixed-fee contracts for defined deliverables eliminated the incentive to inflate hours or extend projects unnecessarily. Detailed project scopes prevented scope creep and billing disputes. Regular client feedback sessions ensured that service quality met expectations and addressed concerns before they became problems. I had also implemented complete financial transparency, providing clients with detailed breakdowns of how their fees were allocated and what specific value they received for each component of the work. This level of openness was unusual in consulting, but it built trust and demonstrated the genuine efficiency of working without corporate overhead and profit-sharing requirements. The physical infrastructure of cross-strategic consulting reflected these values. I had moved from my home office to a small but professional space downtown, designed to accommodate client meetings while maintaining the personal touch that distinguished my practice from corporate competitors. The office walls displayed client testimonials, industry certifications, and a framed copy of the court settlement that had validated my decision to expose fraud rather than remain complicit in deception. New clients often asked about that document, and it provided an opportunity to explain my commitment to integrity and accountability. But perhaps the most meaningful aspect of the practice's growth was the opportunity to mentor other professionals who were questioning corporate cultures that demanded ethical compromises. I had developed formal mentorship relationships with 6 former corporate consultants who were building their own independent practices: Margaret, the former Hartwell Associates accountant, had become a close collaborator, providing forensic accounting services for clients who suspected billing irregularities from other service providers. Together, we had identified and prevented 3 additional fraud schemes at different consulting firms. 2 Junior associates from Hartwell Associates had launched their own partnership, specializing in technology consulting with transparent pricing and honest communication about project timelines and challenges. Their success demonstrated that the market rewarded integrity when it was combined with competence and reliability. The informal network of ethical practitioners had grown to include 12 independent consultants, 3 small firms, and 2 corporate employees who had successfully advocated for transparency reforms within their organizations. We met quarterly to share best practices, discuss industry trends, and support each other through the challenges of building businesses based on values rather than just profit. The ripple effects extended beyond professional relationships. I had been invited to speak at 3 university business programs about ethical decision-making in professional contexts. The case study of Hartwell Associates had become required reading in several business ethics courses, helping future professionals understand the long-term consequences of compromising integrity for short-term gain. But the most rewarding development was personal, the confidence and self-respect that came from building something honest and sustainable. For 7 years at Hartwell Associates, I had measured success by external validation, performance reviews, partnership consideration, approval from colleagues who were systematically deceiving clients. Now success meant different things: clients who trusted me with their most important challenges, colleagues who respected my integrity, and the knowledge that my work created genuine value rather than extracting profit through deception. The anniversary of my termination passed without fanfare, but I marked it privately as the day my real career had begun. The security escort, the public humiliation, and the months of uncertainty had been necessary steps toward building something better than what I had lost. Cross-strategic consulting represented more than professional success. It was proof that integrity and competence could create sustainable competitive advantages, that honest communication could build stronger client relationships than corporate positioning, and that individual values could shape entire industries when enough people chose courage over convenience. The first annual report was just the beginning of a story that I was finally writing for myself. The mentorship program certificate arrived on my desk on a Tuesday morning in late November, bearing the seal of the State Business Ethics Council and recognizing Cross-Strategic Consulting's commitment to developing ethical leadership in professional services. It was the culmination of 18 months of volunteer work, but it represented something much larger: the transformation of personal experience into systematic change. The program had grown from informal conversations with former colleagues into a structured initiative that paired experienced ethical practitioners with professionals facing integrity challenges in corporate environments. We had mentored 43 individuals over the past year, helping them navigate situations ranging from billing irregularities to pressure to misrepresent project outcomes. Not everyone chose to leave their corporate positions, nor should they. But each person gained tools for addressing ethical concerns constructively, understanding their legal protections as whistleblowers, and making informed decisions about when compromise was acceptable and when it crossed the line into complicity. The success stories were varied but consistent in theme. A marketing consultant who successfully advocated for honest advertising practices within her firm. An accountant who exposed billing fraud and received protection as a whistleblower rather than retaliation. A junior associate who documented service quality problems and helped his firm implement corrective measures before client relationships were damaged. Each story reinforced the central lesson of my own experience: individual integrity, when supported by courage and documentation, could create positive change even within corrupted systems. But the mentorship program also served another purpose: helping me process and understand the broader implications of what had happened at Hartwell Associates. Through conversations with other professionals facing similar dilemmas, I gained perspective on the systemic factors that enabled fraud and the personal qualities that encouraged resistance. The patterns were remarkably consistent. Fraud thrived in environments where individual performance was measured by metrics that could be manipulated, where client relationships were treated as corporate assets rather than personal responsibilities, and where employees were discouraged from asking questions or challenging established practices. Resistance emerged from professionals who maintained direct client contact, who documented their work carefully, and who prioritized long-term reputation over short-term approval from supervisors. The most effective whistleblowers were often those who had built strong relationships with clients or colleagues outside the corrupted system. These insights had shaped my approach to building cross-strategic consulting and mentoring other practitioners. Transparency wasn't just an ethical choice, it was a strategic advantage that created sustainable competitive benefits. Honest communication built stronger client relationships than corporate messaging. Direct accountability was more efficient than layered bureaucracy. The business case for integrity was compelling, but it required courage to implement when surrounded by competitors who chose different approaches. Reflecting on the 3 years since my termination, I could trace a clear progression from victim to survivor to advocate. The security escort and public humiliation that had seemed like career destruction had actually been the catalyst for professional growth that exceeded anything I could have achieved within corporate constraints. The clients who had supported my decision to expose fraud had become not just business relationships but genuine partnerships built on mutual respect and shared values. Janet Morrison, Dr. Patricia Lewiston, William Patterson, and Maria Santos had all expanded their engagements with cross-strategic consulting, but more importantly, they had become advocates for ethical business practices within their own industries. Their referrals had generated most of my new business. But their testimonials had created something more valuable: credibility within professional networks that valued integrity over institutional prestige. The informal network of ethical practitioners had formalized into the Professional Services Integrity Alliance, with Margaret as executive director and 12 founding members committed to transparency, honest communication, and client-centered service delivery. We had established standards for billing transparency, service quality documentation, and ethical decision-making that were being adopted by regulatory boards and industry associations. The impact extended beyond consulting into other professional services. Legal firms were implementing transparency initiatives modeled on our practices. Accounting firms were adopting client communication protocols that prioritized honesty over defensive positioning. Even large corporations were recognizing that systematic deception created unsustainable legal and reputational risks. But perhaps the most meaningful legacy was personal: the knowledge that I had chosen integrity over security when it mattered most, and that this choice had created opportunities for positive impact that far exceeded what I could have achieved through compliance with corrupted systems. The photo on my desk, the same graduation picture that had sat in my Hartwell Associates office for 7 years, now represented something different. Not the naive optimism of someone who believed that hard work would be fairly rewarded within existing systems, but the earned wisdom of someone who had learned to create value through authentic relationships and honest service. My parents, who had worried about my decision to leave a prestigious firm for uncertain independence, now spoke proudly about my business and the recognition it had received for ethical practices. They understood that security built on deception was more fragile than success built on integrity. The mentorship program certificate would hang next to the court settlement document that had vindicated my decision to expose fraud. Together, they represented the arc of transformation from corporate employee to independent practitioner to advocate for systematic change. Young professionals who visited my office often asked about the transition from corporate security to entrepreneurial uncertainty. My answer had evolved over time, but the core message remained consistent: integrity is not a luxury that can be compromised for career advancement. It is the foundation upon which sustainable success must be built. The clients who laughed as security escorted me out had learned that relationships built on trust cannot be transferred through organizational charts or corporate messaging. They belong to individuals who earn them through consistent action and authentic care for client success. The partners who had intended to use me as a scapegoat discovered that their most knowledgeable critic, once freed from employment constraints, could create consequences they had never anticipated. The industry that had rewarded systematic deception was slowly but steadily changing to prioritize transparency and accountability, and I had learned that sometimes the most important career decision is the choice to walk away from systems that demand the compromise of values that define who you are. The laughing had stopped. The real work had begun.